Jaden.
Hi, my name is Jadine. I'm just excited to hear from Mr. Blackwood and about his experiences, and I'm just excited to learn more.
Great. Milan, it's your show. What do you want to do next? Do you want me to introduce myself?
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. And then I can tell a little bit about my background and like my role and how I got here. Is that okay? Does it sound good?
Yeah, we also have some questions for you relating to that. But yeah, you
Okay.
can introduce that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So hey everybody, I apologize that I can't turn on my camera. My laptop doesn't camera doesn't seem to be wanting to work right now. But my name is Sam Blackwood. I'm currently the South Jersey political director for Congressman Andy Kim and his campaign for the United States Senate. Um, this is not, however, my first role in politics. I can tell you a little bit about how I got started and a little bit where I come from, because I always think that your background is really important and informs this work in politics enormously. So I actually wasn't originally born in New Jersey. I was born in Jamaica. I was adopted when I was 6 years old, and I moved over here. And I grew up in Monmouth County along the Jersey Shore. I was a public school kid through and through. Went up through the public school system. I'm a black man. More often than not, I was the only black person in my class, only person of color in my class, only person of color in my internships. Um, and I can talk to you guys more about what that was like. But I was also a first generation in that I was the first person to come over here from the islands with my family, from my family. And that comes with a lot of pressures in and of itself, which I'm sure some of you guys can understand and we can go into more down the road. But yeah, I went to high school like I imagine all of you guys were. I worked hard. I eventually ended up going to Fordham University, where I studied international studies and political science in New York City. I always like to say, when I'm talking about my college experience, that New York taught me just as much as the classroom and the experiences, professional experiences, going out and finding mentors. Um, Helped shape who I am and how I think more as much as what I learned in the classroom. Um, and then, when it was in college that I really got started in politics and got started in advocacy work and got really interested in figuring out how to make a change. Like when I first thought about what I want to do and I decided, okay, I want to go into public service, the first question that I was asking myself was like, how can I create the greatest amount of change for the most people? Like, what's the issue that I really want to take on and really impact? And for me, it was climate change. So I joined an organization as a field representative on a college campus when I was a sophomore, where my task was to get the university to endorse carbon pricing. I was supposed to convince the president of the university to endorse carbon pricing. He'd never heard of me before, didn't know who I am. But I talked to the right people in the administration. I corralled the students. I had the events, and I eventually successfully got the university to endorse carbon pricing. And there was a press release about it. I eventually ended up working with National Geographic and doing some other really cool things. But that was my first taste of really of creating change, and like and figuring out the work and who I needed to talk to in order to do that. After that, I decided I wanted to get more into mainstream politics, so I went to go work for a woman named Angela Rye. She was the executive director of the Congressional Black Caucus in the United States Congress. I did that my junior year, and then going into my senior year, I interned for Mrs. Obama, and that was an incredible experience. I had the and I can I can go more into that if you all have questions. But I was sitting. I met Mrs. Obama's communications director at dinner. Luckily enough, asked her if she had an internship opportunity available. I went on to intern for her, and then I became the special assistant to her communications director. I eventually ended up working on Mrs. Obama's voting organization and let her get out the vote and voter registration work in Georgia in 2020 during the Biden Trump race. And then I became a director of public policy, where I worked on legislation, writing legislation here in New Jersey, writing and researching legislation here in New Jersey on criminal justice and education. And then I started working on campaigns. And then in 2023, in October 2023, I saw Congressman Andy Kim announce that he was going to run for the United States Senate. And what really inspired me about that was that it was 12 hours after Senator Bob Menendez was indicted for having gold bars and being a foreign agent of the Egyptian government. And that really inspired me, because most politicians plan those kinds of campaigns for years. And here was a guy who just saw something that he really thought was wrong and disagreed with, and decided to step up with little to no plan. And so I made it my mission when I saw that to go out and work for him. And I contacted the right people. I was relentless. I tried to make sure he knew who I was in as many ways as possible. And eventually I ended up being his special assistant. And I traveled with him for the first 6 months of this year. I was his body man, which means that I would travel with him wherever he was going. I would help manage his schedule. I would handle incoming in terms of like people who had wanted business with him. I would make sure it gets put off to the right person. And then eventually I was promoted to the political director role, where I oversee our political strategy in South Jersey, managing relationships with mayors and business leaders and state senators and candidates for Congress, congressmen, and the list goes on and on and on. But I'll stop there. That was a lot of information, and turn it over to you all if you have any questions.
Yeah, so we're gonna start with some like pre-submitted questions, and then we can like open up the floor to anybody who has any additional questions. So first, I don't think the person is here, because they said they would maybe be here. But Rosemary from Wisconsin asks, what role, like what specifically do you do in your role with Congressman Kim, and what kind of responsibilities come with that?
Yeah. So in my role as political director, my responsibilities as political director are a couple. One thing I'm responsible for doing is managing the relationships between the campaign and external stakeholders. And stakeholders can be anybody. They can be business people, they can be shop owners, they can be city council people, they can be teachers, president of teachers unions, anyone. So in my role here, I reach out and build, in a very short period of time, build and maintain relationships with union leaders, CEOs, mayors, city council people, other elected officials, and figure out ways that we can work together in order to help elect Congressman Andy Kim. And a lot of the time, my relationships with these different people who represent these different areas, whether it be a business or represent the NAACP, the Black community, or the Black faith community, or the faith community generally. What we try and figure out is how we can come together to help elect Congressman Andy Kim to the Senate, whether that is through doing an event, but also help them out in whatever ways we can. So the congressman, I'll give you an example. I have relationships with different pastors whose churches have hundreds upon hundreds of congregants, hundreds upon hundreds of congregants. So I build a relationship with this pastor. The congressman is a man of faith. Like, it makes sense for him to have a relationship with a pastor. He shares those kinds of values. And what I do is figure out how to bring the congressman in front of those congregants. And so the congressman can show up on a Sunday, having had this relationship with this church through me, and can speak to the congregants that show up and get his message out there, and people can get to know him and and you know, get a chance to like him and make a determination on whether or not they're going to vote for him. Luckily, Andy is incredibly well liked, and one of the things that we find is that everywhere he goes, if people don't know him, they meet him and they like him, which is rare in politics. So like that pretty much sums up like a lot of what I do. Obviously I have to think about strategically, like I have to figure out how to make sure that I'm not I'm managing these relationships well, that I'm keeping people happy. There's some times where I have to keep people, I have to teach people how to respect me and respect the campaign. Um, but that's primarily what I do, is build these relationships, figure out how we can work together to elect Congressman Andy Kim. And then up a layer above that is I strategize and I pick different places strategically where we should go and all that stuff. But that's really detailed. Next question.
Yeah, that's certainly very interesting, and like building on that kind of our next question is like, what advice do you have for high school students or just young people in general who want to get involved in politics and advocacy, either as like a career or just volunteering?
Yeah. I think a couple things. Look, if you know, if you want to lead, if you want to be a leader in this space, um, your personal development is just as important as your professional development. It's just as important as the jobs and the internships you get, like who you are, your character, how you manage your ego and your pride, how you take feedback and criticism, how do you disagree with people, and how do you come to a conclusion that works for everyone. These sorts of skills are skills that you are going to be using in your everyday life, to navigate your friendships, to navigate school, to navigate your family, your relate, all of that stuff. Um, and so you want to become really good at that just for your own sake as a person. But those things will show up in the workplace. So I encourage you guys. This is something that I work really hard on. Is be self-aware, be self-reflective. You know, be humble enough to admit when you've done something wrong, and be humble enough to admit that you don't know everything, and be open to learning. And by doing those sorts of things, you will grow very naturally into someone that people are going to want to work with. And in some cases, people are going to want to follow. So as I have been fortunate enough where I have landed great internships with really awesome leaders. And what I have done is try and pick up on who they are as a person, their character, their personality, their habits, because those are the things that make them effective or not. In some cases, very effective, in some cases, not so effective. But you know, like so I encourage you guys to remain humble, be open minded, have the value of a hard work ethic. If you want to be really good at politics, you need to be able to work hard. You need to have stamina. And in order to do that, you need to make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons and that it's a genuine passion. So there are different parts of this work. You can be in communications, you can be in political, you can be in field, you can be on the policy side. Like, find the part of the work that really speaks to you, because you don't want to be doing something that you don't love to do every single day. And in order for you to be really good at something, I think that you really have to love it. So if anything, I'll just leave you guys with that. Um, uh, on that, well, at least on that question. I don't know if you have anything else.
Yeah. We have one more question before we open it up to the everybody else here. Uh, so do you think that Congressman Kim's campaign message of restoring integrity to politics can be applied and like further emphasized um like across the country, even in like local races, especially in local races?
Yeah. Yeah, I think his message is what's great about his message is that it's universal and it's really relevant for our time. I think that, and this is great for you all as young people who are looking at what's going on in the world and how our leaders are acting. I think that if you look at how our elected leaders on all sides are acting in some cases, people like, Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and other folks, you would think that their job was to be an influencer, a social influencer, as opposed to a lawmaker. So the thing that I think that is really resonant with Congressman Kim, and the thing that I think can make it so universal, um, is the fact that he is trying to say that this sort of influencer type of politician isn't actually how you're supposed to be as an elected lawmaker. You're supposed to be, like I said before, you're supposed to be open-minded and willing to take criticism and thinking about how to fix the problems in our country. And at now more than ever, we need that kind of message. Um, so because I think because that message is so universal, because I think it's so relevant for where we are right now, um, I think that with Congressman Kim stepping up to the United States Senate, knocking on wood, and being Senator Andy Kim and bring those values and that message there, I think that it's going to pick up. And this is me being really optimistic. I think it's going to pick up with more people across the country as more people get to know him and what he's about.
Yeah. Yeah, that was our last um official like pre-submitted question. Does anybody else have questions that they want to ask?
Hi, yeah, I actually have one question. So I was wondering uh, well, actually, I was just wondering what advice um, do you have, especially for individuals of color, in
Mhm.
terms of approaching the political field and making their voice heard, especially in a social climate where people of color are usually underrepresented?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. Give me a second. I want to make sure that I get it right. Get the answer right. Um, so you know, it's interesting. Democratic Party. I have noticed that there's like Democratic Party is becoming more and more diverse. Um, right now, the nominee for president of the United States is a woman of color, Black and Asian American, like Caribbean American woman. The chairman of the Democratic Party is a Black man. I think I think the vice chairwoman was a Black woman, and or so I say all that to say that I'll even bring up representation in Congress. There's Maxwell Frost, Congressman Maxwell Frost. There's Congressman Alexandria Ocasio Cortez. We, Margaret, are really fortunate because you are younger than I am, but I'm in my 20s. Um, you and I are growing up in a time where we are seeing a lot of representation, or a lot more representation of people who look like us and come from backgrounds that are much more similar to ours in positions of power. And what that should tell you and what that should tell everybody on this call is that we have every bit of capability and is right to be in those rooms as anybody else. So the advice that I would have for you is to hold on to that. I have never been afraid of, sorry, it's not that. Sorry, I have been afraid, but I've overcome the fear of letting my voice be heard in the room. Part of that, part of my privilege, part of that comes from my privilege as a man. Um, uh, feeling a bit more of that entitlement, but you too have every much as right to speak up and have your voice be heard and share your perspective, and your experience. You as a young person have experienced the world in a way that a lot of adults haven't. That experience is valuable. Like, your experience as a woman of color, when you come to the table, that experience is valuable. Your insight is valuable, and you should hold on to that. And if anybody ever tells you that you're not ready, or you need to quiet down, or it's not your time, like, I think that you should just look to people like Vice President Harris and all of these other folks that we have now in leadership, who didn't let those kinds of folks, or what those folks were saying, get to them and hold them back. It's our time. I'm 26 years old. I am young. I am very hungry. I'm ready to really create change. And there's so much, and I think that now is our time, especially now as a woman. Are you kidding me? Like, I think the president of the United States is about to be a woman. I think a lot of great things are about to happen for our country. Obviously, not all of our problems will be fixed by the snap of a finger or one election, but I think that we're in a great place, and I think you should be really inspired by that.
Wow, thank you so much for that wonderful response. That was very thoughtful.
Of
And I
course.
I know you can't see me right now, but I was nodding the whole time.
Great.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thanks for the question. Anyone else?
Yeah,
Um,
sorry, you can go first.
oh, okay. Thank you. I was just wondering, what specifically about Andy Kim and his policies motivated you to want to work for him? What drew you to being on his staff, and what advice would you give to, upcoming students who do want to pursue a career in politics in
Mhm.
choosing their jobs?
Yeah. So yeah. So I have never worked for anyone that I didn't believe in. I'd rather not. I'd rather mow lawns, or get an hourly job, um, than do that. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to navigate those things. So when it came to Andy, it was I look for a couple things in, like, leaders and people that I work for. I look for sincerity. Um, I look for capability. I look for you know certain values. Um, and when I saw that he was stepping up to challenge Bob Menendez, I looked into his background, and you can, when you look into people's backgrounds, you can get a sense of who they are. And here was a guy who came from middle class family, born in Boston, grew up in New Jersey, in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Hardworking student, uh, which is not necessary to success, but it just told me something. And he went to University of Chicago. Then he went to get his Rhodes Scholarship, and he became Dr. Andy Kim with his PhD in international relations. And this was the first moment from what I could read about his life that told me that he was a little bit different. Instead of going to Wall Street and cashing out at 22 years old or 26 years old, being Dr. Andy Kim, he went to the United States Agency for International Development, which deals with humanitarian crises. And he went into war zones and famine zones and genocide zones. He came back. He went to go work at the Department of Defense and Department of State Department. And then he went to work in the White House and National Security Council. So thus far, his entire career has now been spent in public service. He's never stepped into private sector whatsoever. And then Donald Trump gets elected, and he actually works in the Trump administration for a year because this is national security work. It's apolitical. It has no side. And then he stepped away because he couldn't do it anymore. And then he ran for Congress in the same district where he grew up against a congressman who was trying to gut the Affordable Care Act. He wasn't planning to run for Congress. He did it because this guy was going after pre-existing conditions and other aspects of the Affordable Care Act that was going to hurt a lot of people. And he ran in a district that Trump won. But guess what? This guy won it at the same time. And he did it 3 times in a row. So I'm looking at someone who is a public servant, who's spent his career defending his country, who clearly has the work ethic, clearly has the capability, continues to win, in every aspect. He grinded, he got his, Rhodes Scholarship, he grinded, he worked in the White House. Like, those are not hard, those are not easy things to do. And I just saw somebody who was a true patriot through and through, and wasn't going to let anything or anybody hold him back. So because I saw all of those qualities, I was like, this is the guy who I believe in truly, who I think could be good for this country. And then I effectively was living, like, I was with him for 16 hours a day for 6 months. I got to really know him, and I was like, we need this guy. So, like, look for those kinds of values in the people that you're hoping to go work for. People like Andy are rare, but the folks are out there. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Okay. No, I just want to say thank you again for speaking with us today. That was, it's been very informational today. I just wanted to hear about your experience in the Obama administration. I think that was like really interesting when you mentioned that, and kind of like ask, how did you like rise the ranks to get to the position you are right now?
Yeah, so I didn't work in the Obama administration. I started to work for the Obamas in 2019. That's when I graduated from college. And so this was 2 years after, or 2 or 3 years after they'd left the White House. And I worked for Mrs. Obama in the capacity as an assistant director for communications. I wrote press releases, dealt with the press, managed the calendar for our chief communications officer, and what I mostly worked on was all of Mrs. Obama's nonprofits and projects that she carried over from the White House. So the stuff that she started in the White House that she wanted to continue, she put in this thing called Civic Advisors, and that's what I worked on. And that was an incredible experience. Everybody I worked with was a Obama White House alumni, so they'd all worked in the White House. So I was coming straight out of college, and the first professional environment I'm working with all White House people. And for me, that was incredible because I knew that I was getting a great education in professionalism and communications and how to run big nonprofits and how to do big nationwide campaigns and how to manage complex schedules and travel and all of these things. And so that's like, that's how, yeah, that was my role there. And then how I got here is when I was the congressman, I started as the congressman's body person. I was an advisor and special assistant back in January. And I was that from January to June. From January to June, I was with the congressman almost every single day for 12 hours a day. I would drive him all around the state. And in that role, he and I got to know each other really well. But in addition to just driving him around the state, I also managed his relationships, and not managed his relationships, but since I was in the room with him when we were doing fundraisers or events or meetings, I was often the person who was handing off relationships that he was building to the appropriate person on the campaign staff. I also played a role. I don't know if now you guys probably weren't paying attention to this, but I also played a role in winning county conventions. So each of our counties had different conventions for who they were going to support. And so for that 6 months, I also led the outreach to the delegates to win those county conventions. And I convinced people to vote for us, and I was successful. I was really good at it. I was successful at it. We won most of them. And so when we got to June and we won the primary on a campaign, you can get promoted very quickly because things move really fast and they need the most capable people in the best roles, in the roles that are best suited for them. So when the primary came, I had done such a good job. I had a great relationship with the congressman. They were like, we think you could actually do any job on this campaign, but we want you to run the campaign in the southern half of the state. And so I took that on. It's been a great challenge in some ways, but also just a great opportunity, and it's been a lot of fun. And part of the reason I'm able to do this part of the reason I'm able to do this and be able to talk to people who are significantly older than me, I'm always the youngest person on the phone. In a meeting, I'm always the youngest person. Meetings, speaking engagements, panels that I sit on, I'm always the youngest person. But why I have the confidence to do this and why I'm able to do this is for what I told you about earlier, which was that I have been intentional about, building my character and figuring out who I am and figuring out my values and all of those things, as much as I've been focused on, climbing the ladder, so to speak.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any more questions?
Okay.
Okay, so if nobody has any more questions, then I guess we can wrap this up. But so thank you for everybody for coming. And I was going to put the New Jersey Mobilize link in the chat in case you are in New Jersey and want to get involved. And then obviously Mobilize is a great resource for everybody. I mean, this event was there, stuff like that. So yeah, thank you everybody for coming.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody. Everybody, Milan has my email if you guys want to get in touch.
Yeah.
So, all right, everyone. Nice meeting you.